Hey, I'm Lee Balcom, and I've got a letter here, and it's fairly long. Lots of information that's included in this, but there's one central question, and it's probably a question that you have too. And the question is, can I save my marriage? Second question underneath that is it possible to save every marriage? Now, that's a great question. Is it possible to save every message? So let me be, or every marriage, that's the message, right? Every marriage. So let me be very clear. No, it is not possible to save every marriage. Let me be very clear about that. It is not possible. Not every marriage is going to be saved. So no. Now, there's a lot of detail in there about my marriage. Can my marriage be saved? And that's really the central question that matters to you. Can you save your marriage? Not what happens to everything else. Sometimes we talk about statistics, right? And statistics don't matter until how they apply to you. So statistically speaking, a little less than 50% of all marriages end in divorce. That's pretty tough. I mean, we're somewhere in the range of a coin toss. But it's not a coin toss that determines whether a marriage works or not. It's how you handle things, right? So it's more like, do you know how to play the game than just the coin toss that's chance. If you know how to play the game, then you know how to work through that. Now, let's get to the heart of this. Can your marriage be saved? If I had the capacity of telling you, I mean, especially through this, right? Reaching somehow through the lens all the way to you and being able to determine whether your marriage can be saved or not, I would be a wealthy guy, right? I would have my crystal ball. Way back in my teen years, I used to have lots of kind of carny friends from the carnival, sideshow carnival people, because I did a lot of magic. And magicians and carnies seem to get along rather well, since some of them are the same. And so I knew a lot of people who were fortune tellers. And what they were trying to do was kind of get a read of the situation and tell somebody something they wanted to hear. I don't think they could even have predicted whether a marriage was going to last or not. They would have had an opinion, and some of them really believed it. So how do we determine that? Like, is it your marriage that's going to be saved? What do you do, in fact, to save your marriage? So let me go at a different angle. It's not, can you save your marriage, but are you going to work towards that? Because there's only one way to find out if it can be saved, and that is to try to save it. And that's what it boils down to. Are you going to do what it takes to get there? I want to tell you a story, and this story took place a number of decades ago. Early on in my career, part of my training, I was a chaplain in a hospital, and part of that hospital coverage was kids area, the kids hospital. And so that often meant that I was in the emergency room when bad situations came in. And I was there to comfort the family and also be kind of a relay between the medical staff and the family. And so I got called to the ER one February evening, one night. And that February evening left such an impression on my mind that I still think of it today. Sometimes I think of it in a cold sweat. So when I got to the ER, the family was gathering in the family waiting room. The wife was there, the woman was there, the mother. And she looked like she'd just gotten out of the shower. Her hair was wet. She was soaked, wrapped in some blankets. Her husband, the father, was dry. And so I was trying to kind of get a feel for the situation. And as I stepped out, I got a quick update from the nurses. What had happened is they'd been traveling home one February night, slippery road, lost control, slid into the river, the February cold river, right into the river. The mother was able to get free pretty quickly, and the water quickly came into the car, and she was trying to get her child out, and she couldn't. The child was very safely snapped into the child seat, and she struggled, and pretty soon she was being overwhelmed with water, and cold water, February water, cold water. Probably the only thing that saved the mother's life is that her hands got numb from the cold and she had to let go and she just popped to the surface. Now, the unfortunate thing about this was that as they were going down the bank, headed towards the water, the car behind them noticed and immediately called 911. And so the swift water rescue was on the scene almost immediately. I mean, it was so fast. And so they were trying to keep track of the car as it was beginning to bounce downstream. And they eventually were able to get the car, get in the car, and free the child from the restraints. Unfortunately, that child had been underwater for half an hour. Half an hour. And so as they got the child out, they were also having to restrain the mother who had been trying to get back into the water to try to get her child. And they realized with all the panic that was going on, all the concern with the mother, that they were going to go through the motions of trying to revive this child, even though there was no sign of life. And so they began to work on this child and transported the child to the ER, and the mother was in the ambulance, and she's watching and not knowing what's really going on. Half an hour in the water. And so they wanted to get to the hospital and let that whatever was going to unfold happen there. So they get to the hospital. It's where I'm waiting. And they have the child in the back. And so I agree to go back and check. That's my job as a chaplain. So I go back to the back and I honestly, with the story I'd been told, was expecting to see nothing, just quiet as they were going to be gathered around that body. That's not what was going on. I walked in and the lights were on, and I saw the crash cart, and I saw the nursing staff, and I saw a doctor who was working hard on this little child, this little body there. Another doctor off to the side was saying to the doctor, let's call it. Call it. Let's call it. Call the time of death. There's a big clock on the wall that they look up at and set the time of death. But they were continuing to work. So I had no extra information to take back to this family. I went back to the family and I said, hey, they're still working, because I could see how distraught this family was. They're still working. I sat with the family, tried to keep them company. I noticed that the tension had grown between the mother and the father, the husband and wife, because the wife was just blaming herself, just berating herself, and he was not exactly off that line. I mean, he was trying to comfort her, but he was also clearly upset about what had happened. And as that was continuing on and we were trying to find some place of comfort, I decided I need to go check again. I thought it had been a couple of hours. It had been 10 minutes. So I go back in expecting that I was going to be met with a sight I didn't want to see. When I walked in, that doctor was still working, and a couple of nurses were also. A lot of the other staff had left. I looked up on the screen. That line was flat across, reading her heart rate. And they were still working. I really wasn't sure what I was going to tell the family. I just stood there a minute trying to compose myself. I mean, I was feeling it too, this poor child. That doctor kept working. And kept working. And as I stood there, I saw this little thing, a little blip on the screen. And at first I thought, maybe they hit one of the lines on her, or maybe it was just because of what they were doing. There's a little blip there. I looked over, and the nurse kind of looked over at me, and we stood and stared at that. A little while later, there's another blip. And another blip. And then we had a little flutter of heart rate. And then there was a very slow heart rate. There was something going on. And the doctor kept working. The nurses had gathered. More staff came over to help, and they were doing everything they could at that point. The heart started again. The little girl moved. She started to shiver. Well, now I didn't really know what to do because I'm crying, and You know what you don't need is when you're out there waiting to hear something to have the chaplain crying, and the nurses were crying, the doctors crying, and we had no idea what was going to come of this, but her heart was beating. So I went back out and I told the family the only thing I could. They were still working on her, but she moved. She had moved. That's all I could tell them. Some time passed, and finally the doctor came out and said, your daughter is stable. We don't know what the damage has been, but she is stable, and so we're going to move her up to intensive care. And so I talked to the doctor afterwards, and I said, tell me what happened, because everybody was giving up. And he said, I couldn't give up. And I said, what kept you going? And he said, because I knew that if I stopped, that was it. There was no chance. That if this girl had any chance, the only way was because I would keep going. That I was the one who was holding the hope. I was the one who was continuing the efforts to get to something better. I was it. They wanted me to call it. And I knew if I did, that was it. There was no turning back. This doctor's stubbornness, refusal to give up, was all that stood between this girl and death. And in this case, it worked. Now, would that ever happen again? I don't know. I don't know how often that would happen. I know it happened that night. And the only reason that child walked out the door of the hospital, not long after that, with no side effects, was because that doctor, when everybody else had give up, walk away, call it, said, no, I'm going to keep working. Because the worst that happens is I can't do anything. But the best that happens is I saved this girl. I remember that story because so many times I see this kind of same scenario in marriages where the only thing standing between the possibility of something working out and sure divorce is one person deciding they are going to keep going. So this email I received with all the information on it, all those, the data points, all the fighting, all the hurt, that's not what tells the story. I've seen enough situations come back when I really thought that there was no way for them to come back. Now, I have also seen situations that I thought, you've got this. You will save your marriage. And they not succeed because one or both gave up. What stands between you and the possibility of your marriage working out is your effort, right? That's the only way you get there. The possibility of divorce, the possibility of marriage, these are two paths. And what I know is the path to divorce, it is guaranteed if nobody takes action. If nobody takes action. This path is a possibility if at least one person will take action. Can this marriage be saved? I don't know if it will be saved. Yes, it can be saved. I don't know if it will be saved, but I do know that the one path to get there is effort, is trying. Now, I know that's the hard news because the next piece is, what do I do about that? Get some help for that. There are plenty of places, resources. I tend to think that mine is a good path, but you'll have to decide what to do about that. If you want to start on the path with my program, I worked dealing with connection and change and creation. That's how I encompass that. And that program is available at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. But if you're wondering if it can be saved, you are standing there, continuing the effort. That's the way to move forward. If you want to save your marriage, don't ask the question, can it be saved? Will it be saved? Ask the question, what can I do to save this marriage, and then start taking action. This is Lee Balcom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage, and if I can help, come visit me at savethemarriage.com.